Hi, welcome to Two Doctors Homestead. My name's Daniel,
And I'm Janet.
and this is Coffee Talk. Before we get into the topic of the day, we're going to highlight our coffee here. We're going with Black Rifle Coffee Beyond Black. Great coffee, great company. Support their mission for veterans, first responders. Great company. So the topic of today is dishwasher maintenance. I believe we were going to dig in on dishwasher maintenance today.
I thought you were doing prepping.
Prepping, right. No, you're right. Sorry, hang on. We're going to talk about prepping. Got to be prepared here. I am prepared for our prepper talk.
That's being prepared.
Got my tinfoil hat. Most of you already know why I've got the tinfoil hat on, but I'll go ahead and explain it anyway. It's so the government can't read my mind. So we got a lot of stuff going on here. We're going to talk about prepping, and I need my tinfoil hat to really get into it properly. And honestly, trying to have that prepper conversation with people, a lot of them say take off the tinfoil hat, right? It's a common thing, right? And and why does prepping, being prepared, have that bad kind of bad stigmatism, bad feel to it? If I said, hey, I'm a Boy Scout and I just like being prepared, I think that's socially acceptable. No one's going to say, dude, take off your tinfoil hat. Why would you want to be prepared? If I said I like to wear a seatbelt in case I get in an accident, people are going to say, of course, right? You could get in an accident. The numbers are out there to support that. People get in car accidents every day. But when you talk about prepping, in general, as a prepper, as a community, it's got a bad reputation, right? And people immediately are like, whoa, these guys are some tinfoil hat people. And you were right. Here we go. I got the tinfoil hat. I'll take it off actually. Here, we'll let the government get back in my mind. They know I disconnected from the matrix there for a second. I'm back in, everything's all right. All good thoughts, no thought crimes here. So, I want to talk about what is prepping, what is a prepper, why you prepare, talk about some resources, some common terminology, some key areas, and we'll look at some books that are good for prepping. Why the terminology is bad. If you said, I live in an area where we have power outages, which we do. We've had power outages in the past, and we want to prepare for those power outages in case it happens. We're gonna get some extra stuff, and really, I think prepping, one side of prepping is having extra stuff, but that's not all prepping is. It's not always about having 2 years of rice stashed away in the garage. Having stuff is good depending on the situation. Understanding how to handle situations is another side of preparedness. You could say mental preparedness, physical preparedness. Those are all aspects of preparedness, for being prepared, being a prepper. You could say I didn't really choose to be a prepper. I'm a second generation prepper. My dad was a survivalist, so I grew up in a prepping household, doing bug out drills as a kid and that kind of thing. So it's something I've always carried throughout my life, the idea of being prepared. Certainly did the Boy Scouts, and they say, hey, Boy Scouts, being prepared, right? You
It's right
gotta
there
be
in the
prepared.
motto.
It's right there in the motto, be prepared. You need that pocket knife, you need these things, right? You need to, you can't walk into a situation and not have the stuff or the skills to start a fire, right? And there's some good resources out there. There's an article that I wanted to hit on, and I'll put a link. If you're tired of defending being a prepper, or if you're wondering, hey, why do I want to be a prepper? There's the surprisingly solid mathematical case of the tinfoil hat prepper. This is published by Recoil Staff. This says 3 years ago. It was an original article by B.J. Campbell, and he did research for hydrology, stormwater hydrology. So his job, his trade, as I understand it, was he would look at different geographical areas and say, what is the chance of a flood, right? When you're doing insurance, you want to know, hey, that house there, what's the chance of a 100-year flood or a 200-year flood or a 1,000-year flood? And that's important to be able to kind of extrapolate that information using mathematical formulas and say, what's the risk? What's the risk of that big flood coming? Well, he took that, those formulas, that mindset, and he took it to prepping, right? What's the chance of social collapse, of violent uprisings, some horrible end of the world local type event, right? And he put the math to it and look at his article, and this is boiling it down to very small. He's saying, you know, using the flood math, that over an 18-year span, right, there's a 10% chance of violent revolution. So it's a great article, it's a great thought experiment, as he calls it. Say, is there a chance, right? Is there a chance things could get to that point of societal collapse, whether it's civil war? You know, we see things all around the world right now, where things tend to fall apart, wars are breaking out. You look obviously what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, right? You know, life in Ukraine, probably not so great right now. It's a hard place to be,
Most
right?
people are going through a lot.
You say, well, that's not going to happen here, and okay, right? I'm not here to argue of what is going to happen where and when, right? We're gonna talk really about prepping, and it's up to you to decide why you prepare, and is there a line, right? Is there a line between it's okay to prepare and it's tinfoil hat crazy? And doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter where you're at on the line. Do you know when you've crossed that line? And once again, that line is really just about social acceptance of your level of preparedness. I don't think it's the act of being prepared that would cause people to say, hey, take off that tinfoil hat, which has been said to me before by many people. It's not the act of being prepared. It's the second half, which is the why. What are you preparing for? What are you worried about? That's not going to happen, right? You're crazy. Math doesn't necessarily support that. History doesn't necessarily support that, right? So we got the tinfoil hat for that. Take it off again. Don't want to disconnect for too long. They'll come knocking on the door and wondering what happened to his signal here. Okay, so why prepare? What is shit hit the fan? SHTF, you'll hear that term. Prepping community and outside, right? It's not like they made it up necessarily. It's SHTF.
Yeah, that one's old.
Yeah, it's an old term, right? Not claiming it. You know, one thing is natural disasters, right? And we're gonna stay on the non-tinfoil hat side of the line here. Natural disasters happen, right? We see them in Buffalo right now. Bad weather, people are dying, and it happens every year. You know, the cold hits, the storms hit. I can't say any specific case that this one was prepared or this person was not prepared, right? And hey, if this guy had a blanket in his car, maybe he wouldn't have froze to death, right? I can't say that, and I'm not going to say that. I will say, you know, looking at natural disasters, looking at extreme weather, those kind of situations, you know, can you be more prepared? Can you be prepared for extreme weather? We had you know, like you could call it an extreme weather event for Texas, right? We had an extreme weather event where it froze, and we lost power, right? We lost power for about a day and a half. Some people lost power for a week. People all over the United States have been losing power, and there is some kind of attack on our power grid. We'll kind of get to that one separately, but looking at, say, extreme weather, it's really cold. It's really cold outside. Your power could go out, right? So are you prepared for that? You don't have to be a prepper. You have to have the tinfoil hat. You can say, you know what? We could be in a blackout and it's like cold outside. It's going to become cold inside, right? Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for it to be cold inside without having to go to the grocery store? Something funny that happens here in Texas is every time they announce bad weather's coming, literally every time,
People run to the grocery store.
people run to the grocery store. They're like, oh my God, a storm's coming. Oh my God, you mean it's going to be freezing tomorrow? Everybody runs to the grocery store. It's packed. Grocery store's packed. We didn't go
They
last
need milk
time.
and bread.
Right, get the milk and bread. Holy cow, the world's gonna end. We need our milk and bread. Well, that shows a lack of preparedness, right, and a lack of understanding as well, and some of that's the mental preparedness, which is to say, something's coming that's not part of my normal everyday. I need to react. So that reaction is, oh, okay, I'll go to the grocery store and we're gonna get some stuff and we'll be okay.
Oh. I mean,
Right.
I feel like people feel they need to do something.
Right, you feel you, right, exactly.
There's an
You feel
urgency to
there's an
do
urgency
something.
to do something. So being prepared is basically saying something may happen. I'm going to prepare now, right? So that when something happens, I'm not in a panic urgency to do something. We're already prepared. You know, a lot of people went through COVID. We all had COVID. We were prepared for that as much as you probably can
We didn't
be.
get COVID.
We never got COVID. Yeah, we never got COVID. We were prepared for that. And what's that mean is we didn't have to rush to the grocery store to get toilet paper, right? You know, we didn't have to. We weren't fighting people for toilet paper because we're prepared, right? Does that mean I have a year's worth of toilet paper? No, but it means being prepared, right? So on the why you're prepared, right? Extreme weather happens every year. Now you can look at where you live and say, hey, I live, you know, I don't live in an area that gets a freeze. Well, do you live in an area that gets hurricanes? Do you live in an area that gets wildfires? Do you live in an area that gets tornadoes? Do you live in an area that gets earthquakes? Do you live near a volcano? Right? You might live near all of those things, and at any moment, given the time of year, those could affect you, right? So just generally being prepared means, hey, let's think about it now, so that when it happens, if it happens, and some happen all the time, we're not rushing to the grocery store and like, oh my God, it's coming. What am I going to do? Milk. Let's get some milk. Right? Because people do that. People actually do that.
Yeah. I mean,
every
you
year.
might not be able to rush to the grocery store though.
Might not be able to get to the grocery
It could be one
store.
of those
Right.
situations where you can't actually get there.
Right. You can't actually get there. Right. So why prepare? Well, you don't want to be that guy waiting in line with a cart full of, you know, of bread and milk, because storms come tomorrow and you needed to do something, right? But we can kind of take it a step further and say famine. Well, famine happens, you know, maybe not so much in the U.S. I think we're pretty well fed here, but it happens around the world. When you look at everything that's going on in the world right now with things like fertilizer shortages, potential, you know, weather changes that have happened throughout the United States that have caused crop shortages. You look at what some of the major world government organizations are saying, more famine next year. Like famine's kind of a thing. You look at places like Venezuela, when their society collapsed a couple years ago, you know, access to food was not guaranteed, right? So you can say famine, that can certainly be on your
In the
list.
United States, we have access to abundance of food.
We have an abundance, right?
So
So
we
it's
have
hard to
people
imagine.
that are starving, yes, but
Right, yeah.
we have an abundance to the food. It's
Right.
just people don't really have access to the
Yeah.
funds to get them for
Right,
some people.
right. It's hard to imagine not having food in the U.S., and that's fine. You know, it doesn't have to be the center point of your why, right? It's certainly something we'll look at and talk about, and maybe you should think about. Riots and social collapse. Well, we've seen a lot of riots, certainly over the last couple of years. Riots happen. There were riots in Wisconsin back in, what was it, 2010 through 2011, 12, something like that. We were living up in Chicago in the
My
time.
Wisconsin peeps, they're hardcore.
Right, there were riots up there. This is before all the George Floyd riots and all the other riots and the looting and the burning and all the Occupy stuff. Way back, you know, age of innocence, before the pandemic, there were riots there. And I worked with a guy that lived there, and he kind of described like it was a little bit weird to have people outside his house rioting. And he even said, you know, just from, there was kind of an understanding, I don't know if you talked to the police or what, but police were not going to respond to you unless it was, you know, major serious. Like if someone broke into your car, oops, well, they broke into your car, right? And we've seen riots, going back to LA riots and before, Societal collapse. Once again, why prepare? Why? What about societal collapse? Well, you look at the article. I'll put the link. He said 10% chance every 18 years of just a general collapse. You know, some people would think we're heading to that. Some people say we're heading to a lot of things that aren't good. It can be on your list, right? This is a list. You know, and so we're drifting into tinfoil hat territory. I'll put it back on. Maybe when we're talking about societal collapse, major wars amongst Americans potentially, for whatever reason. War in general, you know, once again, Russia, Ukraine, that's a war. It's not here, right? So when America, like, no big deal, Russia, Ukraine, they'll sort it out. Well, if you lived in Ukraine, that's not so good. There's a lot of wars all the time, all over the world, and actually the article touches on that a little bit. We happen to live in a place that's not ever really happened in a long time. Not to say it can't happen to us here, or that the wars in other places could impact us in other ways, right? But war is a thing. It's always been a thing throughout history. EMP, good thing I got my hat still on here. We're getting into EMPs. EMP, that's always on the list of why prepare. EMP, electromagnetic pulse. So that is what happens when certain nuclear devices are detonated, generally above ground level, right? I'm not going to give altitudes and types of detonations and types of impact and explosion, but it creates this high voltage wave that wipes out electronics. So GoPros and laptops and cell phones and all that stuff wiped out. Right. The car, all the good stuff we like, that we depend upon for survival, gone. Sounds horrible, but it's a thing, right? Our enemies, you know, we as a country, I'm in America, if you're not, that's okay, have weapons capable of doing that. You can say that's crazy, put your tinfoil hat on, take it off, whatever, it's never going to happen, but understand that there are people that hate us that have weapons capable of doing that to us. So it's a thing, right? Is it a 1% chance? Is it a 10% chance? I don't know. You know, I don't really know on that. Solar flares, it's another kind of EMP. That's one of those we really don't know. But essentially what happens is there's this kind of coronal mass ejection. There's these flares, bursts that come from the sun over a certain timeline. They've hit our Earth before. It happens. It would have a similar impact potentially to an EMP, right? And that could just happen. You know, there's a lot of stuff that could just happen at kind of any moment, especially when you're getting into the universe and the things moving around in the universe that could take out our planet. I don't want to go too far into that, asteroids, that kind of stuff. Absolutely could happen. It's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen in my lifetime. I don't know. Polar shift, you know, as an old school prepper, that was always on the list, is the North and South poles are actually shifting, and they're going to flip. No one really knows what's going to happen, but it is, honestly, it's actually happening. There was a lot of talk that it could happen someday, but it's actually happening. It's happened before throughout history. We don't really know what's going to happen when it happens, but it's something that does happen, can happen, has happened. And I had volcanoes, and I touched on volcanoes, common, uncommon, right? So we'll say common volcanoes. I don't need the tinfoil hat from that. I lived up in Washington for a while. There's a volcano there. Never lived in Hawaii. There's volcanoes in Hawaii. There are volcanoes around. If you live in the area of a volcano, I think you've got to understand sometimes volcanoes erupt, right? There was a big eruption. I think it was Tonga. Huge eruption. They could see it from space. Volcanoes erupt. So if you live near a volcano, you might want to be prepared for that. And we'll get the tinfoil hat back on here now. Get this back on here. No one knows what I'm about to say. Feels good. So you can just feel the cleansingness of the mind control rays. Uncommon volcanoes. So what is that? So that's Yellowstone. So Yellowstone supervolcano. Now I'm just going to make up some numbers.
Not the show.
Right, not the show Yellowstone, the volcano Yellowstone. I'm going to make up numbers. You can look them up. It goes off like every 200,000 years, and it's like 50,000 years late or something like that. that. So if you look at all the times we know it's gone off, it should have gone off like 50,000 years ago. Could go off at any moment, and if you look at the maps and projections, if it does, it kind of wipes out most of America. It's a big one, super volcanoes. They're out there. Not saying you gotta worry about it. It's on the list though. All right. So we talked about why. Why prepare, right? Why do I need to be prepared? You know, I just get up and I go to work and I come home and I watch TV and I'm good. Sports on the weekend, I don't need to be prepared. I'm prepared for that, and that's fine. You know, once again, you don't have to be prepared. You don't have to be a prepper. And don't feel like you have to carry the tinfoil hat and be a prepper to be prepared. Say you're a Boy Scout. We may have mentioned it. Say you're a YouTuber that just likes to have 2 years of food stashed. We see them on YouTube, there's a couple channels. I'm not a prepper.
Yeah.
I just like having 2 years of food stashed away because it makes me, I guess, feel better, which is cool, good for you from a prepper perspective. And I understand why you don't want to have the tinfoil hat and have that prepper label, right? I get it. You can be prepared. So we talked about why. Let's talk about some common prepper terminology, some in-crowd, the deep prepper. You know, we have our deep prepper in-crowd meetings in dark rooms on social media, and they come up with stuff. One is rule of threes, right? When you talk about being prepared, you say, how do I get started? Well, rule of threes is actually a good place to get started. What's that mean? What are the rule of threes? Where are these threes? Well, you say 3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks. So if you want to be prepared for anything, what's 3 minutes? Well, 3 minutes without oxygen, right? 3 minutes without oxygen, you're probably dead. Maybe before, maybe after. How long can you hold your breath?
Unless you're real good at holding your breath.
Unless you're real good at holding your breath.
I'm sure there's people out there.
There are, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure 3 minutes doesn't apply to everyone. You know, cardio, right? Rule number one is cardio. Rule of threes, rule number one is 3 minutes. Not a lot of situations you have to think about that, hey, I might be out of air, right? But it's there,
Yeah.
right? Maybe maybe you like to protest violently and they throw tear gas at you, so you got your gas mask because you got 3 minutes. 3 minutes for that is the first of the rule of threes. The next one, I guess if you're choking, right? If you're choking, that's for your 3 minutes. The next one is 3 hours. 3 hours, they say 3 hours without shelter, right? In, and we'll say in, right? Because I could go sit outside for 3 hours by the pool and I'm going to be all right. 3 hours. Bad weather. All right, once again, look at what's happening in New York and Buffalo. You go out into the storm, you might not make 3 hours of just wandering around without shelter, and shelter can be more than a tent or a house. It could be proper outerwear, proper clothing. It's 3 hours. 3 hours without shelter. 3 days, the next rule of three. 3 days without water, right? You need water. We take it for granted. We have unlimited clean water here in the United States, in most places. Maybe not places like Flint, Michigan. You know, there's places where they don't have clean water.
Yeah,
We take it for
stuff
granted.
out.
You know, if you ever didn't have water, you got 3 days, right, to find some clean water. You can drink dirty water, extend that 3 days, but there are a lot of other issues that go along with drinking dirty water. And the last one is 3 weeks. We did 3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks. 3 weeks without food, that's 21 days without food. You're not going to be in good shape.
That's the length of A Naked and Afraid.
That's the
stint.
length of A Naked and Afraid episode. You watch that. If you're wondering what it's like not to eat for 3 weeks, watch that show. There's people that don't eat for 3 weeks, right? They don't die. They're not in good shape. So why is that important? Why do you need to know your rule of threes? Well, if we're talking about being prepared, think about things in that order, right? Maybe 3 minutes without air is not a problem. Maybe you think, yeah, I should probably have a gas mask or something like that. We don't carry around scuba tanks or anything like that, right? 3 hours, we said 3 hours without shelter. Well, do you have shelter, right? We're in a shelter right now, you know. We knew winter was coming, so we got a jacket, right? You got jackets. What is your shelter? What's protecting you from the elements, and how reliable is that, right? We're going to talk a little bit about bug in, bug out, that kind of stuff. You can't take your house with you to the store. You know, once again, not to cash in on Buffalo, but you know, as I understand it, people froze to death in their cars, right? Literally, they're digging up bodies of people that froze to death in their cars. Well, that's your 3 hours without shelter. The car wasn't a good shelter in that case. Not making light of a horrible situation, but that's shelters on that list, right? Is, are you prepared is your shelter sufficient for you to survive in the freeze, in the Arizona desert? How long can you do, wandering around the desert in Death Valley or Arizona without proper shelter, right? So you're going to prepare. Hey, shelter is probably important, right? Think about your shelter. Think about the effect of the world around you, extreme weather, other things on that shelter. Is it sufficient? 3 days without water. Do you have water in your house? You've got a tap. I got a sink that's unlimited water. Well, what if it's not unlimited water anymore? Do you have water, right? And we watch a lot of other YouTubers, and they're like, hey, people don't have enough water, and that's probably true, right? Do you have a bottle of water? Do you have a couple bottles of water? Do you have a gallon jug of water, 5-gallon jug of water? Do you have a water bob? You can get them, I think, from Red Cross. That holds 100 gallons of water. How long could you survive if the water stopped coming out of the tap? All right, because it can happen. It happens. It can happen. 3 weeks without food. Once again, now food's important. You need food. You're going to die without food. So we looked at rule of threes. What's that get you? Well, it just gives you kind of a roadmap of when you're thinking about prepping and building up your preps and how you want to be prepared for a situation. How do you prioritize them, right? Another saying we have at secret underground dark prepper meetings: 2 is 1. Say that 2 is, 1 is none, 2 is 1. What does that mean? 2 is 1. Thought 1 was 1. I just said 1 is none. Last time we had the big freeze, we had a little generator. Didn't work. Right? It didn't work. So one little generator was actually none. It turned out to be none, which means you can't always trust that generator that you've had in your shed for 10 years is gonna fire up when you need to charge your cell phone. Right? That's one. That was one solution to if the power goes out, we got that old generator. It's gonna work. Why wouldn't it? Right? It's a good generator. Looks nice. Didn't work. So 1 is none, 2 is 1. So what's 2? Well, 2 doesn't necessarily have to mean I bought 2 of the exact same generators. It means I have 2 ways to produce power in an emergency. Right? That's 2. 2 is 1.
2 is your backup plan.
2 is you've got plan B. If you ever heard of plan B, right? You got plan A and you got plan B. Now you could say prepping is already plan B, so you got a plan C, but you can't just have one and hope it's going to work when you need it to work, because it didn't work for us. Sometimes it doesn't work. All right, so those are some of the secret terminology we talk about, some key areas. All right, and get into the books later, but we'll talk into some key areas, right? I'm going to jump around a little bit, try to keep them in what I would consider order of importance. And what do you mean key areas? Well, you're prepping. What are you prepared for? You tell me what you're going to prepare for. It doesn't have to be the zombie apocalypse. It could just be for the next winter storm. It could be for a lot of things, right? It could just be a Boy Scout and you're going on a camping trip. Once again, we said shelter, right? Shelter is important. Good shelter. Think about your shelter. Don't make assumptions of your shelter. So we saw it in New York. People died in their car. That was shelter. Wasn't good enough, right? More than likely. I don't know the situations. Can't speak to every possible situation, but shelter's a big one. Do you have backup shelter, right? And what does that mean, backup shelter? Wait a minute, I don't have a second house in my house. You could have a tent, you could have sleeping bags, you could have blankets, you could have ways to stay warm, right? Just finished reading the book The Road. They did a lot with a tarp. Right, tarp, I guess, is shelter, right? Tarp is shelter, keeps you dry if it's raining on you. So what's your shelter? What's that look like? And then we're going to go back to, that's your 3 hours without shelter. We'll go 3 days without water. What's your water supply look like? Do you have a water filter? What if your water, so it's happened in the United States, the water all of a sudden is not drinkable. It happens, I think, to my parents a lot, is they'll get an alert saying, oh, sorry, boil water warning. So not just do you have a bottle of water, do you have a water filter? Do you have a way to filter your water? Do you have a way to store water? Do you have extra water bottles, water containers, water jugs, 50-gallon rainwater collection system? It goes on. There's a big list of possible ways to store water, purify water. Water is important. You're not going to make it more than 3 days without water, and once again, you get trapped in your house. Be it a storm or my friend that was in the middle of a riot. It's not like he could just go to the grocery store and get a couple bottles of water. Things can compound, and when problems start happening, they get worse as more problems compound. And one thing about prepping is try to stop those problems from compounding. So you say, yeah, it's cold, that's a problem. Power's out now, we've got two problems. Well, I can't stop the winter, but I can make sure I have backup power, and I can make sure that, hey, the winter's there, but I can stop the cold. So being prepared, you can stop problems from compounding and making your situation worse, putting your life, your family's health in jeopardy, right? So prepping is being able to stop the problems from compounding. So we have water, food. Do you have food? Once again, we like gardening. Camera. Lots of technical difficulties on this video. So we're talking about food, a garden. So we consider ourselves homesteaders because we like to keep livestock. We're not keeping livestock because we're worried about the end of the world, right? We enjoy keeping livestock. We enjoy raising the animals. There's the benefit that we're raising those animals to create food that takes us in the direction of self-sufficiency, which generally like that idea as a prepper, but we're also homesteaders. I don't feel like I need to say I'm a homestead prepper or prepsteader or prepping homesteader or any of that. You can be both. They're not mutually exclusive. You've got to have a life as well, right? So we're homesteaders. I would say as a prepper, having your way to grow food is probably a good idea. Have your own food creation capabilities, food storage. We're not going to get into the details of how to store food or what kind of food to store, but just to understand that's an area to think about, especially if you're new to prepping. All right, so we hit kind of order. We hit shelter, water, food. So I'm going to hit some other areas that we've talked about a little bit. Power, right? Fuel, power. Do you have extra gas for your car? Why would you need that? Well, we're looking at things like potential diesel shortages. That came up a lot in 2022. They're talking about diesel shortages coming. Do you keep extra fuel around? Maybe it's a 5-gallon tank for your lawnmower. There's some safety issues around storing large amounts of fuel, so just be aware of that. Do you have a extra propane tank for your barbecue grill, for your home, maybe propane heater? That comes back to shelter, but certainly falls under power as well. Do you have a generator? Any of those kind of things, right? You need power. When we had the power outage, we were sitting around the house like, hey, how do we charge our cell phones, right? Because we had the little solar cell phone charger, and at one point we drove the car around the back of the house in the snow so we could charge our cell phones. So unprepared. Why unprepared? Well, the generator failed, so that's the 2 is 1, and we didn't really have backup power because the power went out, and figured, okay, we can live without power. Not having power won't kill you. But power is an area to think about when you're getting into prepping and wonder, what do I need to prep? Another area now is safety, personal protection. You could say safety from the elements. We talked about proper clothing, warm clothing in the winter, cool clothing. You don't want to only have a jacket in the summer, right? Proper clothing is part of safety, but also personal protection. Some people don't like guns. I guess I'm not going to go there. But do you have a firearm? Are you able to protect your family? Do you know how to protect yourself, right? Home invasions happen. I've had that conversation with people. Home invasions happen everywhere. Some areas more than others. If someone invades your home, do you have a way to protect yourself, to protect your family? Or are you just going to say, hey, oops, all right, take all my stuff, right? Personal protection. You got to make your own decisions on that, whether you're willing to protect your family, or whether you feel that that's morally wrong to protect yourself or your family, and how you might do that. But I'd recommend you make those decisions up front and not wait until something, until you're threatened, right? You feel your life is threatened, your family's life is threatened, to think about how you might protect your family, right? Or if you're willing to. I know some people say they're not willing to, right? My life or that person's life isn't more important than the stuff, so they can just take my stuff and hopefully they leave me alone. Right? I don't know. Something to think about, right? You do you. Another term you're going to hear, once again, we're going back into the prepper terminology. Bug in, bug out, GHB, get home bag, BO bag, BI bag. We're going to talk about the 10 C's. What's that mean, right? Well, what's a get home bag? Well, the idea of get home bag is, let's say you're at work, and this actually came up recently. There were some stories we heard about people in Florida. There was a big storm that hit, and I'm sure there were situations that came up in New York with the winter storm hit. There might be situations where you're away from home and some event happens, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's civil unrest. You pick your scenario, and now you have to get home, right? And maybe you can't just get in the car and drive home. If you can, great, you're good. You get in the car and you drive home. Well, what if you can't? What if you can't get in the car and drive home? What if you have a flat tire? Well, a spare tire doesn't necessarily fall into a get home bag criteria, but it's good to have, and it's something to think about. How are you going to get home? So some people want to keep a get home bag, which are some basic things they would need to get home, right? If you're at work, think about how far away that is. Is that 10 miles? Do you work 50 miles from home? And how would you get home, if something bad happened? Maybe you're in San Francisco and there's a major earthquake, happens. And now you got to walk home, right? Or a couple years ago, I think there was a big power outage in New York, right? How do you get home? Well, if that's something you want to prepare for, you look at a get home bag and you'd have it stocked with things that are weather appropriate and intended to get you home. I think most people know the distances they generally travel throughout the day. It's no shock how far away work is. Some people, I guess, travel more for work, but in general, you know how far it is to work. Think about when you're somewhere, what would I need to walk home, right? And maybe it's even just a comfortable pair of shoes. If you wear high heels at work, maybe you're not going to walk 10 miles in high heels, maybe you are. It's a term you're going to hear, get home bag, and it's something to think about. Once again, being prepared is, do you have, if you're away from home and you had to walk home, do you have what you need to do that, right? Can you just get it, just walk outside and start walking home? How far is that? Bug in's a big term. I think bug in is always your first option, and we'll give some examples on that. Bugging in, once again, you see a big winter storm hit, you go home, right? You're gonna stay in your house, you're gonna bug in, right? You're in your house, and we're gonna stay here and we're gonna ride out the storm. It's a winter storm, so there's ice outside, you're gonna ride that out. I heard stories of people where their power was out, their house was freezing, and their water was bad. They got out, they bugged out, they left their house and they went somewhere warmer, right? You see it in Florida all the time. A hurricane's coming. Do you stay home? Do you bug in? Or do you leave? Do you bug out, right? You kind of have to think about that ahead of time. You might not have a lot of extra time to think, how am I going to get out of here? How are we going to bug out, right? Do we have a bag? It's a bug out bag comes in, and you'll see, Google bug out bag, and you'll find a million things. It's something to think about ahead of time, as a prepper. If you just want to be prepared, you don't like to use the term prepper, that's all right. I'll give you a pass, right? Not everybody's ready to put on the tinfoil hat and be a prepper, and it's okay. You can have your 2 years of food stored and not be a prepper, right? No one cares. But you might bug out, right? Think about bugging out. What's that going to look like? What would you take with you? Where would you go, right, is an important one. If you're going to bug out, if we were going to leave here, where are we going to go, right? And once again, just like the people rushing to the grocery store to buy milk before the storm, if you think about it ahead of time, if you take a little time to plan ahead, you won't be in a panic, right? Does that mean you need a bug out plan? I don't know, right? That's up to you. You think about it, think about where you would go, under what situations would you bug out, if you would bug out, and would you bug in, and where would you go? It's something to think about, right? I'm not telling you what to do. Transportation, if you're bugging out, if you try to get home, if you're in a place that has bad weather, do you have transportation for that? And what does that mean? Well, first thing you think about is a car, right? Do you have an all-weather vehicle? Do you have an electric car? Do you have an off-road vehicle? Can your car drive in the ice? You know, I've lived in places that have snow. You know, Janet grew up in Chicago where there's winter.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in an area that has winter a lot, you're probably more likely to have an appropriate vehicle. But you know, maybe not, right? Think
Yeah.
about, yeah, maybe not. Not everybody did. Not everybody did,
I mean,
right?
you put your Corvettes away during winter time, but
Right.
you know,
Right.
I mean, you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe not.
You don't have off-road vehicles in Chicago.
Right.
It's not gonna happen.
Right. Yeah. Maybe not. Maybe you don't have proper transportation. And transportation's expensive. Maybe you can't afford proper transportation. Maybe transportation means you got a good pair of boots or a comfortable pair of shoes. Yeah, head on here. Do you have a helicopter? Right, helicopter would be great. I think I've seen, you know, you watch shows like Doomsday Prepper that cast preppers in bad light and look at stuff, and some people are like, yeah, you got a helicopter,
Of course.
and where you get in a helicopter, good for you. You know, helicopter's a great bug out vehicle. You get
I'm
in
pretty
that
sure those people
helicopter.
have bunkers too.
Right, yeah, and who does? Maybe the rich, you know, and you know, no, I'm not, not an eat the rich guy, but yeah, I mean, helicopter's a great example, bug out vehicle. Transportation, but you gotta think about where you're gonna go. Can you afford good transportation? Do you have a good pair of boots? That could be your transportation. I remember as a teenager, we rode all over town on bicycles. Do you have a bicycle? Right? What's your transportation look like? And how will that transportation help you in a bad situation? Right? Firewood. Once again, if you can, I guess there's places where you can't now. Fireplace, the ability to create fire, having the tools to start a fire, different tools to start a fire, knowing how to start a fire, having firewood, having the tools to gather firewood, store firewood. That's all good stuff, right? Especially in the wintertime. But even in not in the wintertime, you know, when we had the power outage here, I guess that was wintertime, but we had the power outage here. You know, we could have made a fire. We got a cowboy cooker, could have made a fire in that and cooked food there. Fire is good. Fire is life. Ways to heat your house, we kind of talked about that. Firewood. Once again, in the wintertime, do you have backup heaters? You know, what are some backup heaters? There's propane heaters, there's electric heaters, all sorts of different heaters out there. But ways to heat your house is something to think about as a key area. We talked about seasonal impact. So another area of prepping, medicine, right? Two kinds of medicine, or two categories, I would say. There's first aid. Do you have stuff to do basic first aid, right? I mean, we work on a homestead, cut fingers and stuff all the time.
Use a lot of Band-Aids, aren't
We use a lot of Band-Aids. Stab myself with a knife right here, cutting something inappropriately. Bad technique. You can get cut. You know, I know a couple of people have cut their fingers off chopping wood in a regular situation, not even an emergency situation. But in an emergency situation or any situation, people can get hurt, right? First aid's a good thing, especially if you don't have a first aid kit, if you don't know how to use a first aid kit. I wouldn't wait until you're bleeding to be like, man, I think I'm gonna go to the store and buy some Band-Aids. This cut looks really bad, right? You should have some things that you, as you can afford, and understand how to use them as you provide the time to do that. Have those first aid, right? And I've got and more. So what is and more? Well, you can actually get more than just first aid stuff, right? And when I did the holiday shopping guides, we looked at things like there's places like Jace Medical. I think Contingency is another one where you can actually get things like antibiotics and stuff prescribed to you for emergency situations. So think about first aid. Think about more than first aid. Communication, that's another key area. Communication, you know, do you have a landline, right? Power goes out, you've got your cell phone dies, maybe you can't charge it in your car. Do you have solar chargers for your cell phone? Do you have backup power for your cell phone? What if the cell phones don't work, right? Do you have radios? We have an emergency radio that we use when the weather comes in, because sometimes our internet goes out. Radio is a form of communication, whether it's a two-way radio like a walkie-talkie or a ham radio, or it's just a radio that you can see, hey, what's going on in the world right now. Weather radio is very useful. Think about communication. Satellite phone, once again, expensive. I've seen people in different prepper circles say, yeah, get the sat phone. At least you can make calls, right? If there's a localized disaster, that satellite phone might allow you to make calls. Not leaning towards any one thing or the other. That's an area to think about. All right, we got some more prepper terms here. I want to throw out the 10 C's. So when you're talking about a bug out bag, a get home bag, any of that kind of stuff, how you should be prepared, what you should carry with you. Someone came up with the 10 C's. I think some are forced, right? But they're good either way. If they have to be C's, they're a little bit forced. First one's cutting tool. You carry a pocket knife. Pocket knife's useful. I always carry a pocket knife. Never gonna leave the house without a pocket knife. Combustion device. So that's the C. You could say cigarette lighter would be another C for combustion device. Do you have a lighter? Do you have the ability to create fire? Once again, fire is important. Fire is life. Cover, that's shelter, right? Do you have cover? Do you have a jacket? What are you going to do if it rains on you when you're outside? You carry little emergency parkas around, ponchos. What kind of cover do you have? Container, once again, I think it forced the C on that, but 10 C's container. That's really about, do you have a water bottle, right? Do you have a way to carry water with you? Do you have your water bottle? Cordage can be very useful. You watch the primitive survival stuff, Making Afraid, any of that, they're always making cordage to build their shelters. Alone, making cordage to build their shelters. Could be useful to have cordage on you, especially in a bug out situation or survival situation. We got cotton bandana as one of the 10 C's. Once again, cotton bandana. Try to make it a C there. I didn't make the list. But a bandana can be useful as an arm sling. You hurt your arm. You can use it as a clean your hands. You can use it as a bandage, right? It's in the 10 C's. Cargo tape, which we're talking about duct tape. Once again, it could be a bandage. Use it to fix a lot of stuff. Useful to have. Compass is good, especially if you're planning on traveling any kind of distance outside. It's good to know whether you're going north, south, east, west, right? Compass. Not going to sell you on that. They got cloth, sail, needle. Once again, trying to make a needle into the sea. Doesn't matter. Needle's good. You might have to sew. You've got your cordage there already. Sew holes in your clothes. So fix your tent, whatever. You could use your needle as a compass, but if you're doing the 10 C's, you already got a compass. And then we got kindling device. Different than combustion. They're really talking about a flashlight, but they want to make a flashlight a C. So 10 C's, flashlight. Alright, so we hit the 10 C's. We're wrapping things up here. Books, what are good books, right? And we said prepping is multiple. Get my tinfoil hat and put that over here. Prepping, there's multiple aspects to prepping, right? There are the things, the things part of it, the year's supply of rice and the bandages and the bullets and all that stuff, the beans. There's the stuff, right? Emergency situation, you might find very quickly that you need stuff, whether that's food or water or whatever. That's one aspect of prepping, is having stuff. The other side is having knowledge, right? I think knowledge is as important, if not more important, than the stuff. But it all has its place. So I'm going to show you guys some books. I always recommend this book to anyone interested in prepping. I don't get a kickback on any of this stuff. How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It. I can put a link in here. And it actually covers a lot of the areas that we talked about. It's a good high level. There's things like survival retreat, water, food storage, home fuel and power, gardens and livestock, medical supplies and training. So just a high level. It's a good book. If you don't want to think about prepping and you want to get into it, good book to start with. Now we're going to go a little more advanced book here for survival. Nuclear War Survival Skills. This is a great book. The first edition, this is an updated edition. First edition, original author was actually one of the people that was part of the team that invented the nuclear bomb. So they know a little bit about nuclear, the capabilities, what happens if the nukes go off. And it's quite an involved book here. I mean, it has diagrams on how to build survival bunkers and shelters. So you actually have a picture of how to build a bunker. So his idea behind this book when it was first written was actually, you have this book and the sirens go off and nuclear bombs have hit, right? Which is a scenario that is possible. and you could actually take the time to read the book and build a bomb shelter. Maybe read it ahead of time if you're interested, but
I'm sure the people in Ukraine think it's possible.
right, yeah, yeah. A lot of people actually think it's possible. So
Yeah.
good book. So I don't make anything on these books. So let's keep going with the book side. So on the same idea, Bushcraft Essentials. This is basically the Boy Scout handbook, I would say, but it's little stuff. You know, water bottles and how to do fires and how to make shelters and tie knots. Lots of great stuff. Little pocket book. It's a tiny one. Good book. Another, let's see, I want to kind of keep them by category here. This book we got called My Butcher Book. This is how to butcher, process, and preserve meats. So this is good knowledge to have. Once again, it's how to butcher animals, how to process animals, how to preserve meat, right? Could come up in a lot of situations, and we've used that just in butchering on pigs. Another good book to have as a prepper, Rice and Beans Cookbook. If you're a tinfoil hat prepper and you've got a year's supply of rice and beans, you might want to think about how you're going to cook that, how you're going to live on those rice and beans. All right, then the last two books we're going to look at, this falls on the medical side. So this is Medicinal Herbs, sorry, got stuck in my brain there. It's kind of a cool book. It took some different medicinal herbs and how they might be useful. So not a bad book to think about. And here's the last one, Survival Medicine Handbook. So again, this is an essential guide for when help is not on the way. You know, we're not saying take out your own appendix or someone else's or anything else like that. But once again, you want to be prepared. You know, read the book. I'm not saying do surgery on your friends or anything like that.
Please.
Right, don't do that. But, you know, at least you can learn a little bit about what some of these things are. And hopefully it never comes up that you need to use a lot of this stuff, but a lot of great information on the book. I jumped to inflammatory bowel disease, you know, you never know on that, then straight to sprains and fractures. So knowledge is power. Books can be knowledge, right? Helps if you read them. They're even better knowledge if you read them, but having them certainly is better than not having them.
In paper form.
In paper form, right, but reading them is good. Absorb that knowledge that's in there. That's, I think, a big part of prepping. As I said, more than just having stuff is having knowledge. You know, once again, bad things happen, whether it's a home invasion, right, whether it's a power outage, whether it's a storm, whether you're stuck in your car, bad things happen. You don't want to wait until bad things happen to say, hey, what am I going to do in this situation, right? Because panic's already set in, and it's already a little bit too late at that point. So there we go. Tinfoil hat is off. That was Prepping 101. We could do more videos on prepping. You know, we've got a lot of content there that we could dig into. We'll see how this goes. Let us know. Let us know if you're interested. I know there's a lot of content creators that put a lot out on prepping. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for sitting with us on Coffee Talk. It's New Year's here. It's 10:45. We got fireworks going off outside. So this was just us killing a little time waiting for the ball to drop, making the video for you. So we appreciate you. Thanks for sticking with us.
Thanks.